And now to the fight against Zika here in the United States. The House is about to vote on funding to battle the virus, while the Senate approved a $1 billion package or so yesterday. The House, though, wants to fund even less. It will be voting on a $622 million package today. The Obama administration had asked for $1.9 million in funding. Zika has been linked to severe birth defects in babies and is spread through a type of mosquito. There are now growing concerns about a possible outbreak, especially now that summer and thus mosquito season draws closer or really has arrived. The concern is very real for one woman in particular, BuzzFeed national security reporter Ali Watkins. She believes she contracted the virus while on a walkabout in Mexico. Ali, good enough to join us now from Washington, and we're also joined by CBS News medical contributor Dr. Holly Phillips here with me in New York. Ali, first to you and your story. I know, again, you just wanted to get away for a few days, and what happened next?
I mean, thankfully, it didn't really hit me until after I was back from my trip. But a couple days into my trip to Mexico, I noticed kind of a reddish rash spreading across the back of my back, or the right side of my back. And I think it was the next night I noticed that my eye was red. It was no big deal. I wasn't, feeling terrible or anything like that. But by the time I got home, I noticed a lot of joint pain had started. I started to feel kind of achy, almost akin to like the flu or kind of a mild cold. So I wound up going to the doctor, and she took one look at me and she said, you got bit. And the night before I had Googled the symptoms because I had noticed the rash hadn't gone away. And just on a whim, I was like, gosh, I wonder. And I Googled Zika symptoms, and it said rash, red eye, and joint pain. So I showed up to the doctor, told her, what I was experiencing, and she tested right away. And it knocked me out for about a week. It wasn't anything crazy. I'm not pregnant and not planning to become pregnant anytime soon. So for me, it wasn't a huge deal. But that was kind of the short version of the story. Once I got back from my trip, the doctor said right away and sent all my stuff to the CDC. And
then your doctor, the one thing that struck me too, your doctor gave you a suggestion based on her, expert medical opinion or everything she had to work with. And it didn't quite match up with what the CDC suggests.
Yeah, that was the part that was most striking to me. Again, I kind of have the luxury of not having to be super worried about this. But regardless, the information my doctor was giving me was, one thing in particular that she said was, if you test positive, they're saying that you shouldn't become pregnant for 2 to 3 years after you've tested positive. About an hour after I left the doctor, the CDC actually called me and went through, you send in your blood test, et cetera. And they went through their guidelines, and I told them what my doctor had told me. And they said, well, we've actually changed our guidelines. Now we think that you just shouldn't get pregnant for up to 8 weeks after you test positive. So to me, that was striking because that's a huge difference, 3 years and 8 weeks. And I have not, for the record, I haven't received my blood test back yet. They're backed up about 6 weeks or so. So I don't know for sure. But in the interim, obviously, if I was planning to get pregnant, this would be a real concern.
And Doctor, to that point, I mean, I think there are 2 stages here. Whatever becomes of Zika here in this country will be something that will have to be dealt with. But at this point, the perception, that is, to Ali's point, we're talking 156 weeks or 8. And there's a margin of error there.
There is. Just to put it in the big picture, there is, we know less about this virus than we would like to. In all fairness, what I do with patients is I say, here's the CDC's recommendation. If you have been exposed, women should not become pregnant within the first 8 weeks. Men should hold off trying to get their partners pregnant for 6 months. It can live in sperm longer. But then, when you know a patient well and you really have a relationship with them, there's also the type of personal advice. So we see information about Zika changing every day. So as a doctor, you might say, this is what the CDC has to say. This is what we know now. But personally, you may want to wait a little longer because we don't know how this information will evolve. And I completely understand how that can be confusing to patients. But on the other hand, I think there is some value in kind of personalizing the information and saying, if I were in your shoes, I might want to wait a little bit longer.
I wonder, Ali, as if nothing else, well, a patient zero of sorts, at least in the U.S. media. What's been the experience that you've had in telling specifically your female friends about this? What sort of conversations are being had?
I think the scariest part is what we don't know. And, you know, I tell them that, yeah, this is crazy. I tested positive for Zika, you know, et cetera. And the questions are always, you know, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? What's going to happen? What's going to happen if you eventually have kids? And the answer is, I don't really know. I know there's kind of also this lingering question of nobody really knows if there's going to be effects down the road. It hasn't been around long enough, or this version of Zika hasn't been around long enough for people to know. So that's been one of the more striking parts of this experience for me. The other, as far as talking about resources, along with the vaccine question, I was shocked that the CDC was so backed up on testing, because from what I understand, the test itself shouldn't take that long. But they said they've been so backed up with people coming back from trips and just this concern over who has the virus that I'm now waiting 4 to 6 weeks to get my blood test back. So that's a little scary.
Which adds to the wait time. And Dr. again, you had mentioned this funding fight. The Obama administration had asked for $1.9 billion in emergency funding. We're going to see two bills essentially competing with one another for $1.1 billion, so roughly half, a little bit more, or $600 million and change. And people wonder, is perhaps, if nothing else, is there an Ebola fatigue here? Are people are trying to conflate these two things? These are not similar at all.
They're not the same. They are not the same. But you know what? You really nailed it. I call it epidemic fatigue. I've definitely had patients or just friends that I'm talking to. They say, oh, Ebola was supposed to be so scary and it didn't really materialize here. We hear about dengue fever. We hear about chikungunya. We hear about West Nile. In general, everyone's fine. But you know, that doesn't really give credence to the truth, which is that public efforts, public awareness, public funding on an international level is really what helped to control these outbreaks. It's not just that they were hyped and went away, it's that we heard a lot about them, resources were put in early, and then, you know, we were able to control them. So we hope the same thing will happen here.
Yeah, certainly the fear is understandable in lieu of information, and boy, do we hope we get a lot of that, and soon. Dr. Holly Phillips and Ali Watkins, we appreciate both of your time today very, very much.